The Maple Leafs lose Matthew Knies for games 3 and 4, and he is unlikely to come back for the remainder of the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Welcome into Rink-Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog. Make a play, Canada's choice for free casino games, sports odds, and poker strategies. David Alter and Paul Hendrick with you on an off-day pod as the Toronto Maple Leafs get a couple of days here to lick their wounds before heading to Fort Lauderdale to take on the Panthers in game number 3 of their second-round series. And off the top, we told you what's going on. The big news to come out of Sheldon Keefe's Zoom availability on Friday is that Matthew Knies will be out for games 3 and 4 with a concussion. And based on the symptoms, Sheldon Keefe saying it is unlikely that the 20-year-old will come back for the remainder of the second round. Henny, I've got to ask you, first, your thoughts on the hit. There was Sam Bennett who was kind of dragging him down. People were kind of making the Rock references, laying the smackdown on him, smacking his head on the ice there. There was a good overhead angle that kind of showed more of that, but the NHL Department of Player Safety deciding not to even fine him for that. They actually did fine him for a cross-check to the ear of Michael Bunting, which Sheldon Keefe said after the game he thought was similar to the one that Austin Matthews delivered on Rasmus Dahlin at the outdoor game last year. That one was a 2-game suspension. So, there's a lot to mull around there. But, Henny, let's start with your thoughts on the actual hit. What did you think of it?
Well, I thought it was a terrible hit. And I know fans in Tampa would look at what Bunting did to their player and just sort of laugh in our faces. But first of all, I thought it was a bad hit. Second of all, I'm a little upset with the lack of response regarding support on the ice for their fallen teammate. I look back, maybe Flyers, and maybe these are wrong examples, but I just would have felt there was a little more support in terms of teammates on the ice to go at Bennett after what he had done. I know they were in a precarious situation. You don't want to find yourself going a man down as far as penalty kill situation is concerned, but I would have liked to have seen a bigger response. Team-wise now, this is a big drop-off from a top 6 forward, and considering who they have to bring back into the lineup. And I wondered, do you go with 11-7 moving forward? Because as much as I didn't like it, I kind of like it now. And maybe the blue line could use a bit of a break in that regard, especially with how tired Giordano looks. And maybe this is an opportunity to get Justin Hall back in. I'm not sure how Sheldon's going to handle it, but my immediate reaction was no support from his Maple Leaf teammates on behalf of the fallen Matthew Knies.
Yeah, so, I had an interesting vantage point. It looked bad at the time. It's possible because Knies kind of got up on his own volition and skated over to the bench and remained in the period that maybe they thought it was something they could deal with afterwards. But to your point, Michael Bunting goes through what he goes through. There's really no response there either. And I just wonder if this is, the Leafs kind of feeling a bit snake bitten of the situation as well. One of the themes that we were talking about up in the press box was the Leafs got 2 power plays early and they didn't capitalize on any of those. And then they had to stay on their best behavior to avoid another penalty because I think they felt, and a lot of people would agree, that the smallest little thing they were going to get called on to even things out. And they just didn't do any of that for a long time, where eventually Florida did get called for their 3rd penalty in the row. But, you wonder in hindsight, maybe they should have taken the sacrificial penalty to allow themselves to not feel like they can't throw their weight around or send messages, because it almost seemed like the Leafs were kind of maybe hesitant as a result of the game management of officiating as opposed to actually doing what they should do in that situation. You look at Michael Bunting, case in point. He had a 3-game suspension. He takes that hit to the head, and he can't really say or do anything about it given what he's already gone through. So there's a weird game within the game happening, it seems.
Yeah, it does. It seems like a catch-22 situation. And, Dave, the optics are entirely different if a couple of these goalmouth scrambles going in game 1 or 2, and the Leafs find themselves up 2 games to none as opposed to down 2. I now get an idea of what Tampa hockey fans felt like when Toronto went down there and literally stole a couple of games, literally stole. And maybe really Toronto had no business being up in the series, but they were. And then the margin of error gets really slim. So maybe there's some respect in terms of those slim margins that they've got to behave in some ways. And maybe the response shouldn't have been what I've advocated for. But the optics here, they're entirely different, as I mentioned, if those opportunities go in. And the fact that they're getting these opportunities bodes well. It's just they've got to find a way to put one or two of them in and now start to change this series and get back into it. They're going to have to win at least 2 games down in Sunrise, Florida. They did win 3 games in Tampa. So I think it's well within their skill set. They had 48 hits, I think, last night. 10 by Noel Acciari. I think they're capable of handling this team physically. Florida's on a bit of a heater, thanks to their goaltender. And, Sergei Bobrovsky, and this will be a topic for this podcast, but I mean, 901 save percentage throughout the season. He's lightning hot now at 945, and that's where things are changing. I don't know if Toronto has to change up much. Just win, baby. Just win and find a way to get it done. And that, of course, your best players have to be your best players. And, Kerfoot, Knies, Bunting have scored. O'Reilly is one of your best players, but you know who has to get on board finally. And we'll see if they're able to do it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Alex Kerfoot would move back into the top 9 in that situation. And it's just a matter of if they want to go 11-7, if they want to put Zach Aston-Reese back in and go with the same 12 forwards that started the playoffs, where Matthew Knies was a healthy scratch to start. But let's talk about the supplemental discipline here, because there's a lot going on here. Sheldon Keefe put it in the ear that, the one especially on Bunting there looked similar to cross-checks to the head that he had seen in the past. I went in and it looked, there is some intent more on Matthews because it's more of a retaliatory thing where Sam Bennett is kind of being the instigator and initiating, just trying to clear out of the net there. So not sure how much the same it is, but the contact is similar for sure. What did you make of the fact that just a fine comes out of that? And then what does that do for the dynamic of the remainder of the series? Does it just mean it's going to be receipt collecting going forward for the Toronto Maple Leafs, or do they run the danger of making that too much of a focal point and then putting themselves at risk?
Yeah, they've got to focus on just winning hockey games and not worrying about such situations. The fact of the matter is, okay, if this is the precedence and NHL safety says this is just going to be a fine, you make your bed, you sleep in it. We'll see what comes out of this. I suspect the physicality of this series, given how loud that crowd can be down in Sunrise, it's going to have both sides revved up. I know the margin of error for Toronto is very slim, but you've got to go and play. You've got to play hard. And if this is the way the opposition is going to play, go right back at them with the same thing. There's talk on Twitter today of Wayne Simmons getting into the lineup. I don't know how you feel about that. I don't know whether that's a practical response right now. I think given who the Leafs have, I think they're going to be more than fine. But it seems to be, here are the parameters from which you can work in. And if you do this, you're going to get fined. You're not going to get suspended. I suspect the tempo physically of this series is only going to amp up, especially as the high risk, high reward situation, especially facing the Maple Leafs with 5 games to be played and having to win 4. They've got to go for it. They've got to match up physically as best they can with this Florida team, and that is specific on the forecheck, capitalizing on their power plays, and doing what they've been doing. They could be up 2-0 here, and we're having an entirely different conversation, regardless of what Sam Bennett has done on the ice right now.
Yeah, well, look, the pushing the pace of play, the dictating the play, all that kind of stuff that had been lacking in the Tampa series has not been an issue for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think we can agree on that. It's really just been Sergei Bobrovsky playing like his 2019 self again after Florida had a season of goaltending instability. And then, they started with Alex Lyon. He was good for a game or two, but then they had to make the switch, and Bobrovsky's just rolled with it. And Florida has won 5 consecutive playoff games here, 2 now with the Leafs and the 3 before it to break out of a 3-1 series hole with the Boston Bruins. So, There is that. You know, the Stars are coming under a little bit of scrutiny for the Toronto Maple Leafs because of flash moments that had in that second period. Like we talked about with Rob Wong the other night about how, you know, there's mistakes there from Austin Matthews and there's mistakes from William Nylander early in the second period. And they've already got the bad news that Matthew Knies is not returning for the remainder of the game. And in a minute and 6, the game just turns. They go from a 2-1 lead to a 3-2 deficit. Mm-hmm. That's how the game ends. So the Stars have to be better. But one thing Sheldon Keefe said today was that in the third period, he felt like William Nylander had his best period. Like he was actually pushing things. He was doing the things they wanted him to do. And maybe the Maple Leafs got a little bit unlucky that they weren't able to come from behind. Did you get that sense that William Nylander is ramping up? Or is it a situation where they shouldn't even be in this spot because of how many posts John Tavares hit and because of all these other chances that the Leafs did have that for one reason or another, they weren't putting them in?
Yeah, the big four. I mean, 22 shots on net. Not a single shot goes in. That doesn't happen very often, Dave. And you know, the microscope obviously is magnified given the importance of all these games, shift by shift by shift. And so, you know, if this is during the regular season, I don't think we make much of it. You've got a long runway in which to get things corrected. That's not happening this time around. And so, you know, players like, you know, Willie Nylander, are under that microscope. I thought he had a really good game. You know, that one rush off the boards, navigate the hip check, come in on net and go right to the net, only to be stopped by Bobrovsky. I think it was just an indication. When he's quiet, he really looks quiet. And when he wants to amp up his game, Nylander just looks like a superstar. And he is a superstar. I think it's something you build upon. I agree with Sheldon. I thought it was a very, very good game from him. And again, the optics change if a puck or two goes in from either of those four, and specifically from William Nylander, and they win a game. So, you know, I didn't think last night's game was must win. I think Sunday's game is must win. You can't afford to go down 3-0. And if they win that, the next game is going to be another big must-win game. So William Nylander's either at or near the top of the list with having to produce, as is Austin, as is JT, and as is Mitch. But I saw improvement from William. I was very happy with what he did last night. If able to build on that moving forward, Sunday, I only wish they were playing 2 nights hence as opposed to Sunday. But those are the cards that have been dealt in this series. And I'm very optimistic for what William might be capable of doing given what he did last night in game 2.
Yeah, you're not the only one who's upset about that schedule. Trust me. It's been a topic of conversation.
What's the media doing? Like, what are you guys all doing? Because you had flights booked.
I got a credit for it. That's no big deal. But it was a hassle just trying to deal with it. It was partially my fault because I go for the fares that are cheaper and not the ones that are easily refundable. We were also, you know, it's not just us. Like the bigger story is actually in Edmonton, where they actually had announced game 2 between Vegas and Edmonton for Friday. And then after already announcing game 2, then when they released the remainder of the schedule, they moved it to Saturday. So you had a whole bunch of Edmonton fans who had already purchased stuff, flights and everything, have to pay almost as much as $1,000 more to get an extra night in Vegas, where Saturday night is a premium night in Vegas. It's very expensive compared to during the week. So there was just a lot of craziness. And it's really bush leagued by the league to actually, you know, it's one thing, there's little inconveniences for myself when it comes to work, for the fact that, you know, we thought or were told it was one thing and it ended up being another. But to actually announce to the public a game for game 2 and then a day later switch it is just total bush league. And it had nothing to do with any sort of building a veil or anything. It's strictly for the U.S. television contracts, which is fine. That's fine. But don't announce the games the way you did, or just get your you-know-what together and figure it out before you make the announcement. Because it's just, you know, the Edmonton fans got a pretty raw deal. Even Vegas fans who had, maybe if you're a Vegas season ticket holder and you weren't free on Saturday, but you were Friday. Like, it's really dumb. Like, they should not do that. but that's a whole other podcast. That's why Game 3 will be Sunday, not Saturday. There's US TV rights at play. There's also the fact that because all the US major television markets are out, they look at Toronto and Florida as the premier game now. Where, if it was New York advancing over New Jersey or a different market like or LA or whatever, it would be different. But you look at the 8 remaining markets left, there's not a big US metropolitan market left. Like, it's all smaller markets. So the US TV contracts or the US TV rights holders in TBS and ESPN wanted something else. And so this is what happened. And they won out over Sportsnet, who clearly would have rather had Saturday be Game 3. There's also a Heat game going on tomorrow, and they didn't want to split the South Florida audience that way. So that was one of the other arguments. And
well, you've got the Grand Prix. You've got the Grand
Prix on
Prix
Sunday,
down there.
Yeah.
And the Kentucky Derby, I think, was mentioned, all sort of, which I don't understand. I think
so it's a 6:30 start. The Kentucky Derby is going to be happening during puck drop.
Yeah.
So, like, if I remember correctly, those horse races are like from 6:30 to 6:38. So it might be one of those things where they do the Kentucky Derby, wait for the horse to cross the line, and then drop the puck. It's going to be really strange. So there's that. And yeah, it's a 6:30 start as a result of that, which is also really bizarre. But it's part of a triple header on Sunday. There'll be 3 hockey games, 3:30, 6:30, and 9:30. And so Toronto, Florida is going to be the middle one there. And there's going to be a lot of Leaf fans. And I think we talked already about, the ticket sale thing before, but it'll be interesting to see how many Leaf fans do show up and if the optimism is still there, because as you said, you didn't feel Game 2 was a must win, but Game 3 certainly feels that way. I mean, sure, the last time the Leafs won a Stanley Cup, they did. Was it the last time? No, not the last time. One of the times they had to overcome a 3-0 deficit to win. I can't remember which year that was.
I think we're going back to the mid-1940s for that, weren't we?
Right,
I mean, that was the first time it was done.
Right, in any major pro sport. I think then Boston over New York in the majors was the next one in 2014. So, like, in terms of like championship-esque kind of games, not just early rounds. But anyway, so the Leafs want to avoid that situation. Before we take a break, let's talk about the goaltenders. You mentioned it. Bobrovsky standing on his head. Pretty good. Let's talk about Ilya Samsonov. Maybe not as good as he had been in the previous series, but I don't know if you can fault him for a lot of the goals that took place. After the game, he was pretty curt in his response, which is usually his mood after games. He was also asked about how Bobrovsky is playing and if he feels he has to match that. And he said, I don't give an F.
What did he say there, Dave?
Yeah. I gave the PG version, which is I don't give an F. And then when he was asked why, it's because he's only going to control what he can control, which I think is the right response. I mean, I would expect nothing else in that regard as well. But what do you think about the goaltending situation for Toronto here? I assume Samsonov will get the start in Game 3. I mean, I don't see a reason for a change given everything that's going on right now, because it doesn't look like goaltending is the reason they're losing these games. What say you?
I agree with you. I mean, the save percentage is just .877, really not spectacular, but let's be honest. I think he's given his team an opportunity to win both games 1 and 2. And as mentioned, a William Nylander break to the net goes in. A puck just left or right by any of these other top players goes in. And the Leafs are up 2-0 and we're maybe looking at a parade route. You know how Toronto fans are. It's a bit of an exaggeration. No, I think he's been good. And I don't think you change. I don't think this is a Allmark Swayman situation that they had in Boston. I think Samsonov has been more than good enough. You've got to stick with him. And fatigue's not going to be a factor, obviously. Especially with all these days, 2 games being played now over the course of 6 days. I think you stick with him. I think from Toronto's point of view, you've got to counter the Panthers and what they're doing up the middle. They've done a great job of mucking things up and forcing turnovers. More or less, they've got to navigate Florida's forecheck because, it resulted in the game's first goal last night. But I think Ilya Samsonov has been more than up to the challenge. maybe a goal or two that he'd like back, but for the most part, I think he's played well and has just been overshadowed with how well Sergei Bobrovsky has played. But we know Bobrovsky can drop off the face of the earth as well. He was not the starting goaltender of Florida when the playoffs began. He's caught fire now, and if able to stay hot like he has for an elongated period of time, Dave, they could win a Stanley Cup in Florida, given how well this Florida team is playing as a unit with the goaltending they're getting right now. I think Toronto's goaltending's been good. Can it get a bit better? Maybe, possibly. But Toronto's just got to score some goals. Let's be honest.
Well, look, if Florida did it, I mean, they'd be following the path of President's Trophy winners before them, right? Look at Tampa in 2019. Look at Colorado Avalanche in 2022, right? Like coming back after falling in the second round of 2021, and Florida, President's Trophy winning team last year, not that far removed from it. I think because they had to fight to get in, people didn't give them the credit I thought they deserved going into it. And Paul Maurice certainly seems, this is a guy who's gone deep in the playoffs many times with the Carolina Hurricanes. So this is a guy who knows kind of how to do it in terms of these games, how they matter, the gamesmanship that's involved in it, and a former Toronto Maple Leaf to boot. So, he certainly checks all those boxes for the Florida Panthers. But I'll end on this before we go to break. You know what the key is when a goaltender is riding high and performing as well, what do the Leafs need to do? I think it's pretty simple. Just keep attacking the net. Take the eyes away.
Yeah.
That's what you got to do. And they didn't do that. They were getting quality chances, and I commend them for it. But they weren't creating traffic in front of the net when doing it and taking the eyes away from Bobrovsky. There were too many times on a power play I'm looking, and guys are on the perimeter, on the side of the net, not in front of the net. I'm thinking to myself, you're just letting this guy see everything. Like, get the bodies in there and take the eyes away from the goalie. That's how you change the complexion of the game. And I think that's where the Leafs are going to try to emphasize and do all they can to get in Bobrovsky's kitchen ahead of Game 3. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll have an honest discussion about Mark Giordano and his play as of late. You're listening to Rink Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds where everyone goes to play. Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game. And welcome back to Rink Wide Toronto, presented by Bodog. From sports odds to free casino games, make a play at bodog.net. It is time for the Bodog line of the day. And Henny, despite being down 2-0 in this series, Bodog has the Toronto Maple Leafs at plus 250 to come back and win this series, which, to me is kind of low. I mean, anytime you're down 2-0, that means you got to win 4 out of 5 to pull this off. And plus 250 seems a little low. Does that speak to why you're confident in Toronto's ability to at least square this thing?
I think Toronto's a better hockey team. I really do. And again, pucks have not gone in, and the situation's magnified given what we've talked about. I look at what the Rangers and Devils did. The Devils were down, similar situation, and we saw how that all ended up. So I think it's very much possible. They've got to win Sunday without a doubt. I think they're very capable of doing it. And it's not from lack of effort. The guys are working hard, and tip your hat to the Florida Panthers with what they've accomplished. I just think this series is still very much salvageable, but it's got to start Sunday night. So, no, I guess I pretty much agree with those odds. And I think Toronto's going to come back. That might be the kiss of death because they are riding a fine line between success and not succeeding. But I think they're capable of doing it. This is a club that has been built. This is the best Toronto Maple Leaf hockey team, Dave. We've seen it in a long while. It might not be good enough to get the job done, in this particular situation, but it's good enough to win a Stanley Cup. It absolutely is. So, okay, I'm going to agree with that. And I agree that I think Toronto's going to come back and win this series.
All right. Okay. Well, look, I mean, when you looked on paper after all 8 teams advanced, Toronto certainly looked the best in terms of the talent, in terms of a lot of things put together. It's there's no reason for them not to do it, but we've seen a lot of aberrations in this playoffs, for lack of a better way of putting it, including that New York Rangers thing. I did pick New Jersey to win the cup in my pre-round one selections. And the way they were able to come back, I think, in that series was good. But unlike the Leafs, they only had to drive, 25 minutes to go to the road in that series, where at least the Leafs will have... So yeah, that's right. It's not the Lincoln Tunnel anymore, because now I call it the Penn Station series, because they're both connected by Penn stations. So, but I don't know if anyone locally there calls it that. If you're from New York and you listen to the podcast, please give me a shout out on Twitter or let us know. But anyway, the Leafs will have a bit of a home advantage when they go on the road, as we mentioned, that there will probably be a lot of Leaf fans, despite Florida's attempts to try and lock out Toronto Maple Leaf fans from going to the game. Easier said than done. So Game 3 will occur. And the real question is, what will Mark Giordano's role be on this? And, Henny, I don't think Mark Giordano is in jeopardy of not being in the lineup by any means. Mm-hmm. But Sheldon Keefe today was asked on the Zoom call where he felt Mark Giordano's game was at, and he didn't directly answer the question. And I think, the suggestion was made to me, and I kind of agree with it when I looked at his game over the last week or so, that if his name wasn't Mark Giordano, it might be his turn to sit. But there's just a lot of respect for what this guy's done in the league, the role that he plays, a lot of the different things. You wonder if he's playing hurt because he did have an injury that was admitted to by Keefe toward the end of the regular season. Mm-hmm. And so you wonder if it's that, or if it's the fact that now he's the oldest player in the NHL, and Father Time, you never know when it's going to start biting you, right? So expected goals-wise, Toronto obviously had the better game, but Mark Giordano was, along with Timothy Liljegren, were the worst two. Giordano at 32%, Liljegren 25%. Liljegren's only played a few games here, but Mark Giordano is that common denominator. He was even on the ice for that game-tying goal with Stamkos in Game 6. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on Mark Giordano. And is this one of those things where it's just not going to happen in this playoffs, for better or worse, that Mark Giordano will always be in the lineup? And if it means going 11-7 as a result of that, they do that before ever scratching Giordano?
Yeah, one has to. He's struggling, Dave. I played 15 minutes. He and Lily on the ice, they're outscored 5-on-5.
Yeah,
it's been noticeable. We talked about it earlier this season when he stepped up in a big way for Morgan Riley, and Mark Giordano was one of the reasons the team was so successful during that point in time. Going 13-5 or whatever it was, or 15-3, I forget, or 12-3. In the 15 games that Mo sat out.
Yeah.
But we talked about it, long term, a guy that old cannot be playing that much. And Sheldon knew it back then and, managed those minutes moving forward. Now we're seeing it, especially every second night. And if the schedule is going to benefit anybody right now, I think it might be Mark Giordano with, no games until Sunday and then following Wednesday. But you got to bring up, is it time for Justin Hall to come back in and maybe help out in the PK, because Giordano's eating up a lot of those minutes. Not that Toronto took a lot of penalties, just one yesterday.
Right.
And that was the good news. And Gustafsson, do they come in? The two of them come in terms of bringing out the current bottom pair and bring those guys in. I'm not sure, but I think at least one of those guys is coming in. I think. And you might be able to sit Giordano for a game, but given the days between games, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think somebody's coming out. It's probably going to be Liljegren, and maybe Justin Hall's coming back in the lineup on Sunday.
I just don't see a scenario where they can even have that conversation with Giordano. It's his first time ever in the second round. He took such a hometown discount to come here. Maybe next year, if he's starting to show a drop-off in the second year of that 2-year deal, maybe you can have that conversation. The regular season, it's a lot easier to have than in the playoffs. I'm pretty sure Mark Giordano is self-aware, but he's also a competitor, and the playoff juices certainly can cloud some judgment in terms of how excited you are and just the ability to make sure you want to contribute. And so it's something they've got to keep an eye on, because they started as a mid pair, moved down to the bottom pair, And, Justin Hall, fairly or unfairly, was getting a lot of the criticism for it. But now that Hall's been out and Mark Giordano's play has continued to struggle, you have to start asking that question. You have to start wondering, is it because of him? Is it just because of his age, or is he dealing with something that's undisclosed and that's leading to it? And then what's best for the team at that point, especially if you're a 5'6"? Can you insulate him, bring in a 7th D, and just have it that way? Or do you need to replace him outright because you're not addressing other things you need to do in the lineup? It's certainly going to be a very interesting question as the Leafs kind of go in there. Henny, I want to get a prediction from you for the following game, Game 3. I know you said you're going to come back. What do you got score-wise? What do you think is going to happen in this?
I'm going to go 4-2 Toronto. And I'll tell you what I like about this team. They're getting chances. I also like what they're doing on the draw day. They were 69%. I mean, O'Reilly, 71%. Matthews, 67%. Dave Kampf won 6 of 7 draws, and Tavares, 9 of 14. That's a key. I think they're going to be okay. We're going to have a good conversation Monday morning, but I think they go down to Florida feeling that they can get back into the series. You just got to win the next one and go from there. I'm not certain how you feel. You've seen all these games in person. I'm just going from what I've watched on television. But I haven't been disappointed other than the odd, brief, momentary lapses as we saw in the first 66 seconds of the second period last night. Other than that, they were more than competitive, and that third period easily could have gone the other way. I'm just not sure that, Bobrovsky's pumpkin is going to come, the chariot is going to turn into a pumpkin at one point or another, then the Leafs are going to take hold. They don't have a lot more time to find out, but we're going to get a good idea Sunday night.
Yeah, I think they'll come back as well, too. I mean, granted, I did think they would win game number 2 as well. And maybe they should have. Maybe they deserve to. And maybe the Leafs can push away from the narrative. And as you mentioned, it's funny because there's 2 things that could happen. And we were kind of contemplating it. But the worst thing that could happen for this Toronto Maple Leafs team is that they get swept. Only because if they got swept, I think it tarnishes what would have taken place this year, because it will go from, can they win a round, to, well, they just won one more game, and when can they win a game in the second round? And I think that's something they really have to push off against and, make that opening round mean something. And so I expect that the team will play with a bit more urgency in addition to pushing the pace of play. And as a result of that, that should carry the day. They played pretty well on the road. This playoffs have all been about the road teams. They still need to win one at home, that's for sure. But they got to get it started in game number 3, and we'll be with you the rest of the way. For Paul Hendrick, I'm David Alter. Make sure you rate, subscribe, and listen on all your favorite podcast platforms. We'll come at you after game 3 on the Rink-wide Toronto postgame, presented by Bodog. Make a play at Canada's choice for free casino games, sports odds, and poker strategies. You're listening to Rink-wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.